Hello, you're watching The Food Chain from the BBC World Service with me, Ruth Alexander. Today, why does protein get so much attention? It's in shakes, bars, powders, even teas and coffees. And could that be at the expense of another nutritional essential? Joining me to discuss this is Dr. Emma Beckett, a food and nutrition scientist and communicator in Australia, and author of You Are More Than What You Eat.
Thank you for having me.
Also joining us is physician Dr. Karen Narayan in the UK. Karen's also a social media creator and author of This Book May Save Your Life.
It's a pleasure to be here.
First, let's get the basics on protein. Emma, what is it and why do our bodies need it?
So protein is a macronutrient and it's essential. And its role in the body is all about building blocks. So it creates everything, almost everything in the human body that we need. So whether that's structures like muscles or organs, whether that's enzymes or signaling factors, all of those need protein to be the basis of those building blocks. So that's the number one reason why we need it. People are also very interested in it for reasons of satiety and weight loss and that kind of thing. But compared to our other macros, our fats and our carbs, protein's really interesting because the way we store it is we store it in things that we're using. So if we don't get enough of it, we need to break down things like muscles and structures that we have real functional purpose for.
So if we are hyper focusing on protein, is there a risk that we're not focusing enough on something else?
I think this is a big risk, and this is something that you see on social media a lot, is people talking about prioritizing protein. And as a nutrition scientist, this is a little bit difficult for me because we talk a lot in the nutrition profession about the idea of balance. And people get frustrated with balance because balance doesn't feel actionable like being specifically focused on a certain nutrient is. But balance is about not forsaking one nutrient for the sake of another, because we are not combustion engines. We don't run on one single fuel. We need lots of different essential nutrients for our health and our survival. And we also have lots of different needs when it comes to the way we eat food for social and cultural purposes as well. And so things like our other macronutrients, our complex carbohydrates, which is our fiber, and our essential fats as well, can be getting pushed out with this hyper focus.
Okay, well, let's talk about fibre, which you mentioned there. Dr. Karen Narayan, gut health is one of your interests. What does fibre do for our bodies?
Yeah, I mean, the question could be rephrased to what does fiber not do in our bodies? I believe that either directly or indirectly, fiber has a role in almost every physiological function in humans. But in broad strokes, you could say that there's a dual function. One function is it has this laxative type effect where it sweeps through the intestines and it can basically scrape the lining of the intestines and act as a broom to just keep things moving. So that's the sort of physical mechanical property that fibers usually have. And then the other role is more of a chemical role where the fiber and specific types of fibers are digested in different ways by our gut bacteria to then produce different anti-inflammatory compounds, which are then used to nourish the body in many ways, whether it's brain health or gut health or metabolic health. So there's different functions of fiber depending on what type of fiber you consume, but broadly speaking, there's that chemical and mechanical role, and it's a sort of synergistic effect.
And do you think we're paying enough attention to fibre?
Historically, probably not. I think the tide is turning and there's more people interested in fiber and optimizing their fiber intake and fiber maxing even. It's a trend on TikTok. And I think it's probably the safest trend I've ever seen on TikTok. But yeah, historically and even now, I think there's still a long way to go for people to get up to a decent level of fiber and beyond.
What is fibre maxing?
Fiber maxing is, as it suggests, similar to the protein maxing trend where people are trying to maximize their fiber intake with little hacks or tricks or tips that they could do, whether it's, adding certain seeds or nuts to snacks. It's really to try and get a lot of fiber into every meal. And I think that's heading towards the right way. I can't discredit that trend in any way because, I don't think we're at the stage where we can tell people they're at risk of eating too much fiber. We're well, very, very far away from being to that point.
The fibre trend is picking up pace, but at the moment protein is still worth much more to food and drinks companies. Scott Dicker from SPINS, a consumer markets research company in Chicago, the United States, has been analysing this.
It is very interesting because it is the one macronutrient that continues to have a health halo around it. So sometimes carbs are good, sometimes they're bad for consumers, sometimes fat is good, sometimes it's bad for consumers. But protein seems to have this continuous health halo on it. And you're seeing it really represented in two different ways. There's the inherently high protein categories, so things like yogurt or meat. And then there's the added protein products. So that's when protein's added through all different products throughout the entire store, as well as things like ready to drink protein shakes, ready to mix protein powders. And it's having a huge value on consumers. In fact, we see that high protein products are growing 4 times as fast as non-high protein products across the entire store. So that's when you think about inherently high protein categories, as well as products that are high in protein comparative to their category.
Okay, so both types of protein products, like whole foods versus high protein packaged foods, are both fast growing.
That's right. And if I can lay it out one way, when you look at the top 10 categories in terms of growth, just from a absolute dollar perspective, you see that, and let me just make sure I'm giving you the exact number correctly. But let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them are high protein categories. And that's for absolute dollar growth across the entire store, and that's the natural and conventional channel combined. And this, I looked at this at the beginning of the year, and really over the past 2 years, 9 out of the top 10 are the same. So protein continues to be a key driver in growth.
What kind of products are leading the way?
It's really interesting you say that. One of the first barometers I always look at is protein drinks and protein powders, because that to me really is a temperature check for how much people are buying protein, because we know that for protein powders and ready to drink shakes, they're really buying it for the protein. Whereas we can make an argument that they're buying eggs or meat or yogurt for a different reason. When they're buying protein powder, we know that they're buying, for protein. And so when you look at sales of protein powder and protein ready to drinks, overall it's up 12% over the past 52 weeks. And that includes both brick and mortar and Amazon for that combination. So we know that that is something that's of high interest, and that's extremely impressive because, to your point, we know that there are high protein options in every category right now. And so some of the ones that stood out to me are things like toaster pastries with more than 15 grams of protein are growing at 73%. Hot cereal is growing at over 200% when it has over has over 15 grams of protein. So these are just some categories. We see it happening in cereal too. It's a really interesting perception because a lot of it's these traditionally high carb categories, or categories that were traditionally thought of as junk food. Add a scoop of protein powder to it, and now it's perceived as a health food.
Scott Dicker there. Protein sells, but can you have too much of it? Paul Keeter believes he did. He's the deputy editor of Men's Health magazine in the US. He tried eating high protein packaged products for 3 weeks to see what would happen. Why?
Well, as the food and nutrition editor here at the magazine, I noticed that there were so many of these on the market. And every time I went to the grocery, there were more. As someone who had been following protein and its many benefits for more than a decade, I was wondering why now? And do any of these things taste any good?
So, what kind of things did you eat in those 3 weeks?
What did I not eat? Let's see. I'll give you a sense of what my day was. For breakfast, I had high protein oatmeal with a side of high protein drinkable yogurt. For a snack, I would have a high protein blueberry muffin and maybe a high protein water. Yes, high protein water is also even a thing. Lunch could be anything from high protein macaroni and cheese, boxed macaroni and cheese, to, sometimes I just couldn't take it and I'd have a piece of real fish, but I would crust it and pan sear it with high protein potato chips for a little texture and zing. And then dinner, I did not subject my wife and two young children to this experiment. So I would just make whatever I would normally make for the week as the primary cook in the home. And then I would supplement, with either another high protein drink or maybe a high protein snack on the side.
And how did you feel on this diet?
I went through a series of changes over the course of the 3 weeks. I am not someone who typically eats these kind of products. My diet is based in primarily lean proteins, whole grains, lots of fruit and vegetables, and the occasional, sweet snack or treat. So at first, my palate was like shocked because not only are many of these foods high in protein, they're also incredibly sweet. The vast majority of these products, in order to balance the sort of bitter taste of the amino acids in the proteins, they need to counterweight it with a fair amount of sugar. Now, they also want to keep the sugar down on the label, so they tend to use what scientists are now calling non-nutritive sweeteners. We can't call them artificial sweeteners anymore because many of them come from natural sources. I'm talking about things like stevia. So these non-nutritive sweeteners can be, tens of, to me, it felt like hundreds of times sweeter than your typical cane sugar. So I was left most of the day with some kind of strange, cloying aftertaste in my mouth. It did not make me excited to try more of these high protein foods. So that was sort of week one. There was definitely a flavor adjustment needed.
And at the end of the 3 weeks, what were your conclusions about your high protein diet?
Well, one of the things I was interested in was whether my body composition would change at all. Protein is being sold as a muscle building nutrient, and it is. Research shows that it is. I was eating considerably more protein on this diet, and also strangely working out more because I felt like if I had all this protein in my body, I probably should do something with it. And I took my measurements before the experiment and after the experiment. I did not gain any weight. My bicep measurements were the same. My chest measurements were slightly larger than when I had started the experiment. And that was probably due to the fact that I was eating more protein and doing more heavy lifting. And that has been proven in the science that large load heavy lifting plus protein will help you build muscle.
Was that extra bit of muscle that you gained, was it worth it?
No, I was miserable through almost the entirety of this process.
Are your readers as interested in fibre as they are protein?
No, we have been trying to get them to care about fiber for years. I mean, fiber, as we know, it's great for your heart health. It promotes satiety and fullness. And protein, I think for aesthetic purposes, as we know, can help men build the muscles that they want. Fiber, men can't see their heart in the mirror, right? They can't compare it to the size of other men's hearts. Nobody at the beach cares about what your heart looks like. So I think there's a vanity factor involved with a lot of these products too.
Emma and Rajan, we talked about how you probably can't have too much fiber, but can it be bad to have too much protein?
So I would say most definitely we can have too much protein, and that can be bad because that's literally what too much means. But with a high protein diet, it's really going to depend where you're getting that protein from. So there'll be a big difference between getting that protein from foods and getting that protein from foods that have the protein added to it, as well as getting that protein from supplements. And one of the things that I think would be important for people to remember is that our recommendations for the breakdown of macronutrients that we eat isn't just based on how much carbs, protein, and fat we need. It's based on the nutrients that come in the foods that include those. And the highly processed protein foods that we're seeing on the market today don't necessarily match that balance, and the supplements definitely don't. And so going too hard could upset the balance of other things, as well as mean you're pushing out your other macros like fiber.
Again, there's nuance when you say too much protein. For which audience, for which demographic? If you're an athlete or you're a regular gym goer 5 to 7 times a week, there's studies suggesting that an optimal protein intake to maximize muscle protein synthesis, how much muscle you can build, is between 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilo. So, a 70-kilo individual consuming around 150 grams of protein. For that individual who's training a lot of resistance training, that might be appropriate. And if they're going to 200 or over 200, that could be too much. So it really depends on what stage of life you're in, what your sedentary or how much sedentary, time you have in the day, what your activity levels are, your gender, so many different factors. So that too much protein isn't a blanket term.
This is tricky then, because I was going to ask you how much protein and fiber should we be having, and what does that look like on your plate? But is that difficult to tell us?
For me, the only two things I track on a daily basis is fiber and protein. So I'll always make sure I have at least 40 grams of fiber. I think 30 is probably cutting it fine. And this is literally, bottom of the barrel amount set for a population. Protein wise, me personally, I aim for around 110 to 120 grams of protein a day. And there are foods which you can get both sources.
What does that actually look like on your plate then? What does 40 grams of fiber look like? What does 110 grams of protein look like?
So 40 grams of fiber, if I'm having breakfast, it'd be around 60 grams of rolled oats with chia seeds, about 1 to 2 tablespoons of chia seeds, some raspberries and nuts. And this is in the form of overnight oats. So all of that combined together is around 15 grams of fiber in just that one sitting. I usually take around 5 grams of psyllium husk, as a powder with my yogurt or something. I mix it into my yogurt, so that's about another 5 grams. Usually at some point during the day, I'm a big lover of beans. So I usually have mixed lentils, whether it's sort of butter beans, kidney beans, whatever it is. That's around 7 to 10 grams of fiber in some meal, whether it's lunch or dinner. And I usually have a portion of mixed vegetables as well. So across the day, all of those main meals, maybe some high fiber snacks, which could include nuts or other fruits like berries, I'm at least getting 40 grams of fiber a day.
Do you think we're going to see a real marketing push for fibre? Are the big food companies going to start selling fibre shakes to us, fibre bars? Can you see it catching on in the same way that protein did?
We kind of already had that in the 1990s. The fiber blends to add to beverages was very trendy. But then the data on those didn't pan out in the same way that high fiber foods did. So when we look at the data for things like reducing cancer risk, reducing blood cholesterol, overall longevity, fiber supplements in the beverages and in the capsules didn't have the same reduction in risk as eating the high fiber foods did. And that's why I am very interested in the idea of that variety and all the other things that we get with our high fiber foods, because it's very likely those bioactive compounds as well as those micronutrients is working to reduce that disease risk.
Do you think fiber is as appealing to us consumers as protein? Do you think we're going to get so into it?
I think protein's more attractive to the consumer because protein is very often framed around performance and appearance. And so the longevity and the being strong and the looking strong is very easy to sell to people, compared to the kind of concept that fiber is for staying regular, or fiber is for old people who have trouble going to the bathroom. I think there's some people who still have that hang up. We are seeing now, I think with social media, a really good shift towards people talking about the added benefits of fiber, and not just fiber for survival, but fiber for feeding your gut microbiome and all of the great things that can do. And so maybe if we talked more about the short-term benefits that could come from that, the glowing skin, and those other kinds of well-being aspects that people are more interested in, it might be a bit more saleable.
Dr. Emma Beckett and Dr. Karen Rajan, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Ruth.
And thank you for watching The Food Chain from the BBC World Service. If you enjoyed this episode, just search for The Food Chain wherever you get your BBC podcasts from. And do give us a like and a follow. Thank you.